Welcome to the Exchange Art Artist Workshop Series. Today we are joined by the one and only Sir Wayne Nooten. Thank you for being here, man. This is super exciting. I was really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be on.
Absolutely. And just like a little bit of background on why we're doing these, we want to get a little bit deeper than what happens on Twitter Spaces, right? We want to be able to take the story of an artist, what drives them, what inspires them, how they do the process of creation and releasing, and bring that information to more people in a scale that they can consume. So, really excited to kind of get into your background, what makes you tick, and what makes you you in this space.
Yeah, definitely. Um, my experience with exchange art has been great. Um, A2K and Milst and now you Goku. I think you were a great addition to the team, and yeah, excited to continue to grow in the space and continue to sell and buy art on exchange and on Solana.
Yeah, you're quite a pillar of the space. I really appreciate your approach to both your artistry and the collecting side. I talk to so many artists, and somehow along the way, it always draws back to you, giving them either a small piece of advice that turned into something large, or believing in their art. And it's really amazing to have people like yourself. I want to start though at the journey of you as an artist. And also kind of talk a little bit about what came first, right? Was it that love for collecting art, or was it the creation of art?
Yeah, for me, my art journey started over a decade ago. And I've been pretty candid about this in Twitter spaces that I really discovered art at the lowest point in my life. So I was 21 years old. I had failed out of uni, and I was living at home at my parents' house, and had been fired from a night shift working a hotel job, and really was not accomplishing a lot in my life at that time. And so, I was really depressed and um, just had extremely low self-worth. And in that moment, in those moments, is when I discovered art. And my mother is a self-taught artist, and so I grew up around her making art for a lot of my life. And she was into painting and photography and sculptures with found objects. And so one night I literally stumbled into her art studio, and I started experimenting with materials. And for me, there was something, especially at that time, that was really therapeutic, not only about the act of painting and making art, but also that I had something to show for my efforts, because at that point in my life, I was really not accomplishing a lot. And so, art for me began as therapy, really, and then truly turned into this lifelong passion.
That's really special, and I think it comes across um, in your current artworks, right? And you talk about piecing things together, and I think it's something that you do so well and talk about often. Whether that be part of a painting that you did, or something now where you're dabbling in AI to create some source materials. I find that approach really interesting.
Yeah, I think, that's kind of always been my approach, because I didn't really have rules that I was following. I didn't go to art school. And so, I watched my mom create art, and she didn't go to art school either. And that's not an indictment on anyone who went to art school. I have plenty of artist friends who are extremely talented, and their technical skills that they learned in art school are really valuable. But I think, for me personally, um, I had no preconceived ideas of what art needed to be. And so for me, art is highly experimental. And, I think you've seen that with especially, my early series that I was doing on exchange. Um, Photographic abstractions was really my first collection that gained traction, and that was taking my original photography shot all over the world and digitally cutting it up and reassembling it to make these kind of abstract compositions. And really what this space allowed me to do was take some of those ideas that I was, and really some of that experimentation that I was doing with physical painting, and apply that now with digital tools. And so for me, it was kind of this natural crossover of just a new medium to play with, really. And an extension of that, after the photographic abstractions collection, was the ginger sunlight collection, where I scraped raw ginger into a mason jar full of water, photographed it, and then used digital tools to give the appearance of an abstract painting. So, I do find that my work is highly experimental, but it often comes back to, trying to achieve the effect of painterly quality. I love painting. I love the texture. I love the way paint feels when you're moving it. And, for me, a lot of my works take on this painterly quality.
Yeah, I definitely see that across your artwork. And it's interesting that you talk about texture, because I think something that's so void in digital mediums a lot of time is that texture. When you're creating something digitally, it can be so perfect. So to add these bits of humanity to something that's created through machine, I think is really special.
Yeah, totally. I think, in particular with my process doesn't really make any sense. Like, and that's why I like it, is because most people are unwilling to do it. It's so simple, but it's so laborious, right? I don't have an iPad. I don't have an Apple Pen. I don't have Photoshop. I don't have Procreate. I don't have any of the tools that modern digital artists are using. I use my Mac, and I use the preview app on my Mac. So I'm literally holding down my trackpad, cutting pieces, sometimes hundreds of pieces, copying them, and then pasting them into another preview image, right? And so especially in those early days, that first weekend I discovered that method. I locked myself in my apartment for an entire weekend. And after the first night of doing it, I woke up and I literally could not move my hand. Like, I had ice on my hand the next day, because I was cutting and pasting hundreds of pieces for hours with my finger held down on the trackpad. And if I didn't get it just right, I'd have to redo it. And then in addition to that, you're now battling, there's a feature, I think it's probably more of a bug, candidly, but where when you bring pieces into preview, it tries to auto center it to the last piece you brought it in with. And so I was constantly fighting that. And so I would sometimes have to save it. And then once you save it in preview, it's final. There's no layers. It's not Procreate. You can't go
Yep.
back. So there's something about not only the laborious process, but also this idea of finality too, right? Where, like, whatever happens, and I can't go back and change it. And there's something I really like about that, because it really requires you to improvise then. If you don't like something, yeah, you can kind of paste over it, but it's still on there. And, I think that's what I enjoy most about not only art, but about life as well, as improvising and kind of taking what life or what art or what the piece gives you.
Yeah, it's really cool. It all kind of goes back to that painting thing as well. Like when you mess up on painting, there's no erasing it, right? You have to just figure out how to work with it. So it's interesting to hear that it kind of all ties back to the way that you would typically flow with it, with painting.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of similarities, actually. Like, on the face of it, it doesn't appear that there would be, just given they're such different mediums. But I do find that a lot of the concepts and really a lot of the ways I approach painting have translated really well to this really simple but kind of annoying way of cutting and pasting pieces, and then finding shapes that suggest something, and then sort of moving in that direction, is interesting. And I oftentimes have no idea what I'm going to create when I start. And so that's part of the fun for me, is not knowing. I'd prefer not to know. I would love to just see where it goes and really let the painting speak to me in some way, and then allow my intuition to freely express whatever that is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's always two approaches, right? There's the people who spend a long time with a concept, with figuring out exactly how they're going to go about stuff, and then there's kind of your approach, which is put things down, and then eventually it'll speak back to you, and then you'll find kind of what the piece is all about. So I really enjoy hearing about that process.
Yeah, thank you. I think, the other thing is it's always hard for me to answer when people ask what my process is, because it depends. And I make stuff up, like scraping ginger into a mason jar full of water and creating an abstract series in that way is very different than the current series I'm working on, which involves AI. And really, this series spans four mediums. It starts with a physical painting that I've made that I take a photo of, and then I bring it into AI and give it the image and a word prompt. And then when the AI spits out between 4 and 8 images, I cut and reassemble pieces from those and make an entirely new composition. So again, when you contrast, those are two very different methods. And I'm sure in a year I'll be using even different methods. But I think that's the beauty of this space is we have this technology now, both on chain and off chain, right? So that allow you to experiment and really play with art in new ways. And that's how I approach art. Is I view it as playing. I don't take it super seriously. I think when you try to force your creative process or your ideas onto a piece, I think that oftentimes shows up in the work. And I think I really value free expression, unencumbered free expression. And we have a few artists on Solana who are, you can just tell that there is no inhibitions, right? Like
Yeah.
Tony Tafuro, for example. I mean, you want to talk about just such free work. There's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I want to turn the lens over to how you view collecting art, because I feel like there's probably some similarities in the way that you view your own creation versus collecting creation. And before we dive into that, we'd just love to talk about how you got started in the amazing ways that you're using the funds from the art that you make to then kind of fuel this ecosystem where you get to then support other creators, which I think is a really interesting concept.
Yeah, thanks. So maybe I should take one step back. And, when we talk about collecting art, I started collecting art before, NFTs and digital art. So I started collecting paintings. Like I said, I really love paintings. That's my favorite medium. And so the first painting I bought was probably 3 or 4 years ago. It's from a Georgian artist named Rusudan Kizanishvili. And she does these brilliant oil paintings where she layers on basically, human and animal figures. And sometimes they take on the form of almost like a still life where she's layering on, human and animal figures and foods. Sometimes it's really fascinating. But I bought one of her paintings about probably 4 years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, I guess. And that's in my bedroom. So it's the first thing I see every morning is, wake up, sit up, and that painting's there. And so, I love to have art in my personal space. And I think, that's what really started my collecting journey, as it were, was physical art and specifically paintings. But on Solana and in the digital space, I had this idea for what is now Studio 7 collection. And I remember telling friends and family about it, and even some people in the ecosystem. And I remember feeling like no one was as excited about it as I was. And some part of me, when you have an idea and you think it's a really good idea, and for the most part, people don't respond or react to it, it was kind of disappointing. It was like, um, I thought it was a great idea, and no one else was seeing it at the time, is what it felt like. I'm sure, um, that has everything to do with me and nothing to do with them, right? I wanted people to meet me at my level of enthusiasm and be so excited for it, um, and believe that it would work. And the response was, cool idea, best of luck. Like, and for me, that was also motivating. I am highly motivated by um, rejection, and this wasn't explicit rejection, but there was clearly not, uh, you know, the vision for what it could become, and so that really drove me. And even at the time, I wasn't making really significant sales on Solana, and so I think that could have been a part of it too. But I had a plan and I had an idea for how I wanted to grow my prices over time, and I used several strategies to do that. Most notably, scarcity. I think scarcity actually is quite important. There are a few artists who, once they reach a certain level, scarcity is kind of out the window. John Lay, Degen Poet, a handful of artists on Solana that don't have to play that strategy like that. But I think for the vast majority of artists, it's actually quite important to understand your supply, understand the demand, and then have a real strategy of how you increase prices over time. And my thought was always, and I promise I'll get back to the collecting because we'll circle back to that. But my thought was always produce really high quality work, release it slowly over time. And for the people who believed early on, I wanted them to be able to have upside and to be able to sell my work for more at some point in the future. And you have to be really careful in this space not to represent anything around returns, right? Securities laws and a whole host of other things. But with this being fine art, all I did was express my intention that I'm going to do my very best to continue to produce high quality work, and that I would do my best to increase prices over time. Ultimately, the market had to decide that it was worth that. But I think that proved out. My first series was priced at 3 SOL, and it was 5 pieces by now. It took several weeks to sell out. And for me, it was hard because I've been making art for over a decade. I've sold physical art to collectors all over the world. And it took, some humility to show up to this space, to sell my work for what I thought was less than what it was worth, but to have a strategy in mind to increase that price over time and reward early collectors. And so that's what, I've continued to do. I think, my last probably 5 sales have been 100 SOL or more. And again, really wanted to reward those early collectors who were buying at 3 SOL, 5 SOL, 10 SOL, even 50 SOL. So, that's my plan now. Now it's, how do we go from 100 to 250 or 500 or more? Because I want collectors who believed in my work to be able to share in that upside and to go on this ride with me. And to your earlier question around collecting, that's really when Studio 7 started to gain momentum, is when I started to sell works for more. And when I would take half of those sales proceeds and buy art from other artists, that really got people's attention, especially once those higher sales came in, because, sometimes, with a 50 or 100 SOL sale, that's a significant amount of SOL to be able to put back into the ecosystem and help support other artists, especially early stage artists. And my philosophy around collecting through Studio 7 has been to buy art from artists at a lot of different stages in their career. So for a lot of artists, I was the first collector to buy their work. And it's always really fun to discover art that resonates with you, and to be able to support an artist early on and give them the confidence to they can sell their work here, that they do belong here, and kind of give them this momentum, and then to be able to have have dialogue with them, have a friendship with them, and be able to advise them and give them tips on how to sell their work. And I try to be really candid about my failures. I think that's super important. I share this with a lot of artists, but my first auction got 0 bids. And, I didn't make a double-digit sale on Solana for like, I think 4 or 5 months. And, that's hard. I think it's easy to get discouraged. But I think, sharing those things with other artists is important. I didn't just show up to Solana and everyone wanted to buy my work. For artists who can do that, I think that's amazing. Oftentimes they've built a brand either in Web 2 or the traditional art world or on ETH or whatever. And I think that's amazing, but that's not my story. My story was I showed up without a Twitter account originally. I've only had this Twitter account for like a year. And so I had 0 followers. No one knew who I was. And I had to sell myself and my art to the Solana community. And lucky for me, over time, and it took a lot of hard work, but I was really lucky too, that influential collectors saw the value of my work. It took months, but eventually talking about it enough, sharing enough work, they started to see the value in it. So, Papa Mumu at Big Brain Gallery, HGE, Ceylon and Toshi, those guys were and are influential one-of-one collectors. And, I think their endorsement of my work and them buying my work was really helpful from a visibility standpoint. All of those accounts have larger followings. And I think that's the hardest thing for artists is the marketing piece and just getting your work out there. We have a ton of brilliant artists on Solana. And I think it's just a matter of having a marketing strategy. It's hard because you have to wear so many hats as an artist, as a digital artist. You have to make art that is desirable by the market, and preferences change. We saw and continue to see abstract art have a boom on Solana. I do think photography will have its time on Solana, but it hasn't really happened in a meaningful way yet. I look forward to the day that does happen because I've bought a lot of photography and we have some incredible photographers on Solana, but you're wearing the artist hat, the marketing hat, the business hat. You have to understand crypto markets, right? When do you exit a position so you don't lose, 80% of the value of your sales? I mean, there's a whole deal of complexity that requires a really unique skill set. And so, again, that's why it's so niche still.
I couldn't agree more. It's kind of the real-time trade-offs of this world compared to the previous art world, right? Like, typically in the past, you have teams who are doing this all for you, right? You have people who are finding you collectors. They're out there marketing your work to the right places. Here, it's all on the artists. So, you almost have to work for that extra percentage. And I think we should have to work for it if we're getting that extra percentage, right? We are doing that extra amount of work. And I think it makes it that much more personable, right? You have to actually be involved in each of these different segments. You no longer are just an artist. You're now a business.
Totally. Most artists don't want to hear this, but I share this with any artist who ever asks me for advice. Your artwork is almost secondary to your ability to market your artwork and for your ability to understand what the market is demanding today. And there's a fine line there because when we saw abstraction take off on Solana, you saw a ton of artists who have never made abstract work quickly try to sort out how to make abstract art and then put it on chain because that's what the meta was. And I think it's a fine line. There are so few artists who are truly multidisciplinary and excel in many areas. And so when you do have an artist who, spends their career, and I don't want to discourage artists from experimenting. I think that's really important, but I think it's to experiment for the right reasons. If you're trying to make a quick buck on some meta with a method that you know is not of the highest quality, don't do that would be my advice. Um, but definitely experiment. And again, I think the other side of that is you can experiment. You don't have to mint everything. I think that's an important conversation to have as well, where, especially during the height of the bull market in crypto, you saw so many people rush to this space and became artists overnight. And because they saw the opportunity. To me, that's not really an artist. That's an opportunistic, like capitalism, like business opportunity. And so if you picked, there's nothing wrong with this, but if you picked up an iPad 6 months ago because you saw crypto running and now you're an artist, that's not the same thing as a John Lay who's been drawing for 20 years, or we have photographers who have shot for over a decade. And that's not to discourage new or emerging artists, but I think it's really important to understand like why you're making art. Because if you're making art to solely to accumulate crypto by trading your art for cryptocurrency, that's a different proposition, especially from a collector's perspective. Like when we go back to, you asked earlier about collecting art, I do pay attention to, how long has the artist been making art? And I'm not discouraged from buying art from new artists or emerging artists, but I want to understand why they're making art. If you are making art because you have to, like there's this inherent need to create, and I know that you're going to make art for your entire life, I'm interested in your work. As opposed to, I have come across artists and I've bought work from artists and would find out later that maybe there wasn't the same level of commitment. And look, so few artists are ever going to be able to sell their work for significant prices. So I view some of it as an investment, but really what I'm trying to do with Studio 7 is find work that resonates with me from artists at a whole spectrum of different stages in their careers. I think I've sold a couple pieces because I had offers that were significantly higher than what I bought it for. But I've just bought more art with those proceeds. So again, that was something that was really important for me. And one thing to note is from the sales of my art, I haven't taken one penny out of the ecosystem. And look, that's kind of painful when you think about, 6 months or a year of selling art and
Yeah.
what the price of Sol has done, right? But to me, it's largely irrelevant. I'm long Sol. I still believe in the tech. I more than anything believe in our one of one community on Sol, and for that reason, I haven't taken one penny out of the ecosystem. Half gets staked to a validator, and the other half goes right back to buying art from other artists. So I think we'll know more in a couple of years whether that was a wise financial decision or not. But to me, it's secondary. I think the people that I've met in this space, the art that I've been able to enjoy, not only creating but also collecting, has been worth more than any of the financial gains that may or may not come in the future. Like I'm not counting on that at all.
I think it's a pretty cool bet on the entire space, right? And I don't just mean crypto or Solana, but like specifically this pocket of art that you really believe in, which I think also can kind of lead towards more collectors seeing what you're doing, believing in you, and then wanting to be along for this mission and maybe bid 100, 200 plus Sol, right? It's like, okay, this person is choosing to prove right here that he's here long, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think hopefully over time the quality of my work has improved. I think some of the stuff I'm producing now, when you compare it to the first, second, third, fourth series that I made, there's a significant increase in quality, I think. And that was part of the strategy as well, um, is to leave room for growth to where I could experiment. And I look, when I started on Solana, I didn't know how to use AI with my art. And so I think in this space, it's allowed me the freedom to experiment. And one thing I've been really pleasantly surprised by is by how collectors have been so open to me being a multidisciplinary artist. And I've done everything from painting to having gallery representation for my street style photography to digital art and kind of everything in between. And I think it's just been so humbling to have that so well received. I think in the traditional art world, oftentimes I would speak with galleries and they would be like, well, you need to pick painting or photography. Like you can't really do both. And
Yeah.
for me, it was always like, I think I can make high quality work in both. So I don't really want to pick one. And, again, that's something that has just been amazing to see, the support from collectors who have bought photography and then gone on to buy digital art from me, or sometimes even physical paintings. I did my first physical painting with the NFT on Exchange Art actually a few months ago, and so that was cool. But when I really look at the full spectrum of the types of art that I've sold, the mediums, it's been physical paintings, photography, digital art, the use of AI, and then the use of these very simple digital tools that I'm using. So, I mean, that's 4 mediums right there, where people have accepted that. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think people like yourself doing that kind of shows others that it's possible. Because, like you said, it didn't really seem so possible in the other world of art. Sure, there was a few examples of really talented multidisciplinary artists, but that typically only happens when they get really massive, and then they decide once they're really massive that they want to do something new. So it's cool that you're showing that you can grow while also being in different mediums. I think that's it's pretty important.
I think
This
so
whole
too.
conversation. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just think just one final thought is I think I was uniquely positioned to have success here because I had over a decade's worth of art. I have more art than I know what to do with. Like I've done paintings, photography, sculpture, digital art, collage, like you name it, I've tried it. I've done it and have lots of work over the last decade. But for me, I've only released just a fraction of the work I have available. I mean, I have an external hard drive with 20,000 photos on it from, probably 20 countries, and I've released none of that. And so, yeah, I think I was uniquely positioned not only because I'd been making art for so long and had this body of work, but also have some business understanding. I have a full-time day job where I'm the director of innovation for a real estate development company. And so I run our venture capital arm. And a lot of what I do is big picture strategy on the types of funds and tech that we invest in. And then we relate back to our operating company. And so the combination of having a large body of work and having some business sense and some sense of strategy and marketing, I think kind of uniquely positioned me to have success in this ecosystem.
That brings me to a really great question, and I think like your expertise on this could be beneficial to those listening. And that's, how do you view marketing? How do you view setting that up for yourself? Like you create this piece, and then now you create this narrative around it. Like, what does that marketing campaign look like from inception to going live?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're at. Like if you're a new artist on Solana, your marketing is going to look very different than an established artist. And I think like being really clear on what you want to achieve. Like when I came into this space, I knew where I wanted to get to. I wanted to be one of the top selling artists on Solana. And I think some healthy competition is actually good, not where you're putting other artists down, certainly. But but if you have artists that you look up to, learn from them. And I did that with, John Lay had success very early on, and then I had the pleasure of meeting him at a Solana Hacker House event in LA. And I remember just being really impressed with not only John as a person, but when he would give advice on how he would market his work early on, like last year in particular, I really paid attention. And so I think first have something that you're like aspiring to. Like, what level do you want to get to? And you do have to be realistic, right? Not all of us are going to achieve the level of success of, the top 0.01% of artists on Solana. But if you want to grow your prices over time, if you want to, be in some of those prestigious collections and have more opportunities to sell your work for more in the future, have a target, because I think so few artists are willing to kind of put a stake down and be like, this is where I want to get to. And then once you establish that, that's when you start your marketing plan of how do I get there? And early on, it's going to look very different. I think for me, early on, I had to talk about my work so much. And I think for artists, it's really hard to do that. It was especially for me. I come from Nebraska. I was born and raised in the Midwest, and like, it is looked down upon to talk about yourself endlessly. So it's uncomfortable for me to feel like every single day I'm talking about myself, but that's part of what you have to do. And I think there's a lot of nuance to the way that you speak about your work. You don't want to push it on collectors. You don't want to be DMing collectors and asking them to buy your work. I see that now with artists who will DM me and straight up ask me to buy their work. And I do my best to respond to everyone. But you put a collector in a bad position if you're directly asking them to buy your work and then they say no. It becomes a strange relationship right off the bat. And so I think having a longer term strategy and saying, I think that's part of how putting your stake in the ground of where you want to get to is like, I want to grow my prices over a year or 18 months, not in 2 weeks. I think this space moves really fast. And so there's unrealistic expectations that you can achieve wild success in like a month. Some artists, have they done that? Like early days, John Lay, early days, artists that have had success on other platforms, sure. But for the vast majority of us, that's not the case. And so I think the marketing for me early on was just routinely talking about the work. And I think one thing that's important to remember is there are constantly new people that will see your posts on Twitter and will see your work. And so don't assume that because you posted about it a week ago, that the same group of people are going to see it this week. So it's important to reiterate information, share the same piece again, share your process again, pin a thread on who you are to your profile. So when collectors do come to your site, do come to your Twitter page, they have all that information right there. Make sure your links are working. Regularly check that your links are working to your work. There's all these things that are really important before you even get to the marketing part. They play into it, but I think having your very basic bases covered is really important before you even start down the path of creative marketing. So once you get past that point, I always encourage artists to do buy nows. I, as a collector, do not like auctions, and 24 hours is a long time for me to be watching something, especially if I'm bidding on multiple pieces. And I have a full-time day job. A lot of your like whale collectors are not just collecting art. They've oftentimes achieved that level of financial freedom where they can buy a lot of digital art because they're working in a Web2 job or, have a full-time job. So I think being mindful of that as an artist is really important, but I encourage artists to do buy nows and really talk about the work, talk about the process, talk about you as an artist, whatever makes the work unique. Reiterate that and repeat that message over time. But for me, I started to kind of get creative with some marketing when I had one series that that I was posting and I wasn't minting it. That's another thing that I would tell artists is you don't have to mint it and then post it. Oftentimes I'll post stuff on Twitter before I mint it because I want to gauge the level of interest. It doesn't make sense to not know the demand. So if you can understand what the demand for the piece is before you ever mint it, you're already at an advantage. Because if it resonates with collectors, now we have a conversation. If you don't get the best response, maybe that's not what the market desires today. So maybe you sit on that work for a while. But I think using that information can actually be quite helpful, and certainly was for me, because the first collection that I really gained any traction on was that photographic abstractions on exchange art. And I was posting pieces and not minting them, but just sharing them and giving the story behind the process. And some of the big collectors were DMing me and asking when they would be available. And so what I decided to do was I had two more pieces that were available from the prior collection. It was a photography collection that was shot through a water wall. And what I did was I dangled a carrot and I said, if you own one of my one of ones and there's two pieces left, you will get access to a private metaverse showing of my next collection and you'll get discounted pricing. And so immediately the two pieces sold, and I minted all the NFTs from the next collection, but I didn't list them. And then I brought them into an Aether Labs. It was Solaris at the time, metaverse gallery. And then I shared the link with all the collectors who inquired about it. And so what I said was, guys, you get discounted pricing because you own my work. Pick what you want, first come, first serve. And so once one person bought and saw that pieces were moving, it created this momentum around it where others decided to jump in. And so with that collection, I mean, that was Ceylon, that was Toshi, that was Big Brain Gallery, HGE, and then Walker Guffey, the founder of Hello Moon. And so when you start having influential collectors buying your work, you can really start getting momentum. But it's that first marketing campaign that I think is really important. That's really targeting those people to get buy-in and to be invested in your work. And then the other thing I did, which is kind of funny to think back on now, is it was 2 for 1 for my collectors, where you could buy a piece and I would airdrop you one for free. Now I'm a huge proponent of scarcity. And so what I saw though is that it was influential collectors that were showing interest. And so I wanted them to double down on my work. So by virtue of wanting them to be really invested in my work, I was airdropping one for free. So it was 25 SOL and you get 2 pieces. Since that time, at least one of the collectors has, I think he did like a 4x on his investment in a few months because he had 2 pieces for 25 SOL. And, but again, that's another great marketing material is if you have a collector who buys a piece and sells it a few months later at a significant gain, tweet about that, announce that, show that your work appreciated in value. Like there's all these opportunities to market your work and to show growth, but you have to talk about it. And that's the thing, is being on top of both your art and secondary sales and strategy is challenging. But if you can do that, you can provide yourself with an advantage.
Yeah, I think that's all extremely valuable information. I think it's something that the word alone starts to confuse artists. They're like, what do you mean marketing? But then when you break it down into the different categories of what that means, it becomes a whole lot less scary, right? It's like, oh, wait, I've been doing some form of marketing my whole life, especially as a freelance artist. You're constantly marketing what you do. You just might not realize the way you're doing that. So I really appreciate the deep dive into not only some broader things about marketing, but like kind of the way that you approach them. Because I think what's so cool about the blockchain is you have this history right there. People can go back and see the art history of yourself, right? They can go back and see that growth through hard work. They can see this price climb up. And I think that makes this space really special. You get to see how that campaign interacted in real time almost. It's like clearly this worked. How can I make that be something that I can utilize for my approach?
Totally. And I think as you grow your prices over time, and again, not all artists, the reality is not all artists are going to be able to achieve that top 1% of sales. But if you can grow your work from one sold to 10 sold to 20 sold, that's a huge win. Like, and I think I think that once you get some momentum, it becomes so much easier.
Hmm.
But it's just that first push is really hard. It takes that first collector that has some level of influence in the ecosystem to buy your work and to post about it and to stand by it and be like, this is amazing work. And that's in part what I want to do with Studio 7 is help emerging artists by buying their work and then growing that platform. I think today there's a little over 1,000 followers there, but it's 1,000 followers that care about art, right? These aren't like bots or the influencers that have 50,000 followers and then 8 likes on their posts. Like, this is 1,000 people that actually care about art, want to see what's being bought and sold. And I've seen that at times when I buy art and then post about it from Studio 7, artists have actually sold more work because other collectors follow that account and become interested in the work. And I've had artists reach out to me and be like, thank you so much for buying and posting on Studio 7, because right after you posted, I sold 2 more pieces. And so my thought longer term is if you can grow that Studio 7 account to 10,000, 20,000 followers and buy art and post about it, what impact could that have on an emerging artist, right? Like, how do we get more collectors aware of earlier stage artists on chain? And I think that that's part of the longer term vision for Studio 7 is to be like sort of this outsourced marketing for artists, because that's the hardest part. And I was lucky enough to benefit from that. So it feels only right that I should try to build a platform that enables artists to sell more work. If I can be some small part of that, I would love that. And then I think just the final thing is, like, once you do get that momentum, it only gets easier. Like, once you hit a certain threshold of people aware of your work, especially if you use scarcity correctly. Now I don't mint work and then post about it anymore, and I haven't for probably a month or two. I post the work, and in the bottom of the post, I say collectors who are interested are encouraged to DM for inquiries. And through that, I think, I've done probably 6 private sales where it never gets to market. And I really like that, because then you create this mechanism where collectors have to reach out to you to get access to your work. It's not minted. Sometimes they're bidding against each other in the DMs. And I like that scenario much better, because you're requiring the collectors to come to you as opposed to the opposite.
Yeah.
And for me, that's in part what has helped me, especially kind of get to that next price level of 100 or more, is first producing high quality work. I do think that this collection I've been working on is high quality. I do think it's a unique process. I do think it's original. And so I think that's important. But it's equally important, all the marketing that happened before that point, and then now to be using private sales as a way to make it much more exclusive.
I think that's really incredible, man. The way that you approach that and the education that you provide, in addition to just collecting a piece, I think is really vital to growing the ecosystem further. Right? It's just buying a piece, sure, that helps an artist, but then educating the broader community on why that piece was collected, I think is so crucial for the growth of that all.
Totally. Yeah, I think the other thing I've tried to do, but it's becoming harder now, just because I get so many DMs from artists asking not only for me to buy their work through Studio 7, which again we talked about earlier, and that's hard because that puts a collector in a tough spot. but also to give advice on strategy or scarcity or pricing or how to market their work. And it was easier when I was getting, one a week or two a week, but now I'm very lucky to like have achieved some small degree of success in the ecosystem. But now I'm unable to respond to everyone's DMs asking for strategy because it's so unique to each artist, right? And that's what I'm struggling with now, candidly, is like I've really tried to build my reputation in this space on being really authentic and being really giving, and not only in terms of giving half of my sales back to artists and keeping all of it in the ecosystem, but also giving my time in Twitter spaces, trying to help other artists with their strategy or give feedback if artists have asked which piece they should release or anything around marketing. I've done my very best to respond to everything, but I'm just now reaching like this threshold where I simply can't because I don't have time. I still have a full-time day job. And as much as I would love to do this full time and just interact with artists all day, the reality is I can't do that. And I'm really struggling with that because I want so badly to respond to every artist and to be able to help every artist, but it's not realistic for me to be able to do that. And so, I think this is an excellent way to do that because a lot of artists can watch this and hopefully learn something from it, even if they take away something really small or something that resonates with them, or a new way to think about either your work or your strategy. This reaches a broader audience than having one-on-one conversations. And so I think utilizing things, like this interview or like Twitter Spaces is helpful. So yeah, I appreciate you giving me the platform to do that here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. And I actually have to jump for a Twitter space as well. Haley, unfortunately, is not feeling too well, so I'm gonna cover that one. But it's kind of a perfect little transition here into that, man. I just really appreciate your time and for you coming on, just sharing the abundance of knowledge that you've gained through not only releasing art on chain, but releasing your art and creating art for now so long. So just I really appreciate your insight and you taking the time to do this with us, because we feel the same way. Like the more we make this kind of content that's educational, hopefully the more artists can sit down and plan out what exactly their attack plan is for their future on Solana and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. And it was really great to meet you in Lisbon. I know we've interacted a lot on Twitter prior to that, but there's something really special about being able to meet people in real life and really feel their energy, right? You can feel the enthusiasm, you can feel the good energy, you can feel the positivity, and the true love of not only digital art, but about our ecosystem, right? And so that was something that was very apparent when I met you, was you really care about the space. You really care about artists. And I think what you're doing with Exchange and you as an addition to Exchange, is just really positive. And I'm super glad you're with Exchange.
I really appreciate the kind words, man. Likewise, the admiration, it right back at you. And I think that I hear this space often called an inspiration ecosystem. And it's something I believe in a lot. It's like people like yourself and so many others. Like I get little bits of inspiration, and then that's where my drive comes from. So again, thank you so much for taking the time, not only today, but always to go that extra mile for the creators. I definitely can feel the pains of wanting to always do more, but you can't fill someone else's glass unless yours is full. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. And I think that, the artists who are here for the right reasons, they understand that. So just make sure you have you figured out first. And just, again, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Thanks, Goku. And I'll look forward to catching up with you in Twitter Spaces soon.
Absolutely.